Hey everybody, welcome to the first Girls of Gaming, or at least it would have been the Girls of Gaming if I hadn't changed the segment to D.I.G, which is short for Diversity in Games. Why? Because I wanted to cover more diverse things. I'm not abandoning Girls of Gaming, it's just part of it. I'm focusing on female protagonists in games for my first few months while I get some other projects started. But, yeah, it's a bigger project now. Yay me. Sorry to the entire one person that has been waiting for this. It took me a fucking long time to get the editing to actually work without crashing. But this is really my first serious attempt at editing, and I learned a lot. I learned probably more about what I need to learn than anything else. And it can only go up from here, I assume. And that's why I chose a game that I've not had any particularly strong feelings about, so I don't really give a shit if I fuck it up that much. Though it wasn't that bad of a game. With that, Kameo Elements of Power. Let's do it.
Kameo Elements of Power is an action-adventure game with some slight role-playing elements. Originally designed for the Nintendo GameCube, Microsoft's acquisition of Rare had the game hop from the Nintendo GameCube to the Xbox, before finally finding its home on the Xbox 360 when it was released in 2005. The game places you in the role of Kameo, an elf or a fairy princess. I personally always thought she was a fairy princess until the end said that they were elves, but I digress. Her mother, Queen Thena, granted her the Element of Power and the Whatnot, two tools that are used together to allow Kameo to transform into the Elemental Warriors, which were all previously gathered by her father before he had gone missing. In a fit of jealous rage, Kameo's aptly named sister, Callus, unleashed the Troll King Thorn back upon their world by kissing him and turning him back from being stone. After a brief intro stage in which you have access to 3 of your elemental warriors, Kameo comes across her sister, seemingly devouring her family. Before she gets a chance to stop this, however, Thorn punches Kameo so hard that the elemental warriors are literally knocked out of her. After a cutscene in which Kameo finds herself back at home, she learns what she must do. The young princess must rescue her family, or the ancestors as they are oddly referred to, even by her, as she recollects more and more of the warriors, so that she has enough of a chance to fight against Thorn and protect her kingdom from his tyranny. Throughout her quest, Kameo travels through a series of varied locales which could really only be described as nothing less than vibrant. It really is a pretty game with some of Rare's most interesting monster designs. Each of the main areas has a sort of village hub inhabited by different creatures that are brimming with personality. It is unfortunate that these side characters seem to be a lot more alive than almost any of the main characters, which seem to mostly exist just to give Kameo exposition dumps when she rescues them. The 2 characters that really stood out are the Whatnot and the Mystic. The reason they stand out, though, is because both of them are complete and utter douche nozzles. Seriously, take a look at what happens when you pause the game.
You don't seem to be getting very far. Is it really that complicated?
And people thought Navi was bad. Kameo herself doesn't have a bad personality, but it's not exactly the strongest one either. We'll get into that in a bit, though. As I stated before, Kameo is an action-adventure game. Kameo's main power is being able to transform into the Elemental Warriors. There are 10 warriors to choose from, in addition to Kameo herself, creating a wide variety of gameplay which rarely grew dull. The game is beatable in less than 10 hours if you don't explore that much of the world, and you gain Elemental Warriors very quickly. When you get a warrior, be prepared to play as it in the upcoming dungeon or area, as each one has a unique ability that either provides you a new way to move throughout the world, such as grabbing things in the distance and pulling yourself forward, or a new attack that will allow you to defeat previously invincible enemies. You really are only forced to use them within the area you acquire them, and only very occasionally after. Well, except for Major Room. I fucking hated him, and they kept bringing him back. God. We get it. You can roll up ramps. there had to be something better they could do instead of putting so many fucking ramps. But hey, with all these characters to choose from, how does it actually control? Unfortunately, it plays like it was caught in development hell. Probably because it was. The controls for the characters are very hit or miss, and oftentimes came across as more cumbersome than they really needed to be. Swimming as Deep Blue in particular took me a good 10 minutes or so before I realized that trying to control the camera with the right joystick was actually fucking me over. It felt really counterintuitive to every other control scheme I've played. Well, not everyone, but quite a bit of them. Some of the Elemental Warriors were a joy to play as though, like Ash. Nothing's quite as satisfying as burning hordes of goblins to a crisp as a giant red dragon. The power to transform into monsters is not at all gendered, so yay for that. I mean, I love games that you can turn into monsters. It's something that I've always loved doing ever since I first played, I think, Threads of Fate as a kid. But, oddly though, all the Elemental Warriors are dudes. Not just in the vague sense that they seem to be masculine, but in the fact that you can go and look at their histories, and they're all explicitly referred to as male. Even some of the forms which are basically just inanimate objects. For instance, rubble is literally a gendered rock. A fucking gendered rock. Why they did this is baffling, and I believe it was just them not really thinking compared to any conscious sexism. Not that that's all that much better. It does come across as sexist when you realize that Kameo's own form is by far the weakest, and that she has no other female forms. One could easily view this as saying that women are weak, and the only way they can have power is to become men. So, yeah, that's not really great. But let's take a look at it another way, just to be fair. And I apologize if I fuck this up, but I'd like to bring up tarot cards really quickly. In particular, the Strength card. The Strength card usually depicts a woman calmly taming a large lion. The beast's tongue lolls at its side, demonstrating him submitting to the woman. As with most tarot, the meaning is extremely subjective, yet there are some definitive ideas that tie in with Kameo. Inner strength being necessary to control outer strength. Determination. It's about the knowledge that one can overcome almost any obstacle. If we look at Kameo's control over Elemental Warriors in this light, it does seem a little bit less problematic. Of course, I'm aware that this is a huge stretch, and I'm 90% sure that the creators hadn't even thought about that at all. It would have been really an awesome mechanism for Kameo to have to earn the Elemental Warriors by facing her inner demons and doubts, and each warrior could have represented a different aspect of herself, both masculine and feminine. The battles in which you gain the warriors are already close enough to that as is, considering you fight them only as Kameo and you can't use any of the Elemental Warriors. They were a bit redundant though. Hell, the lesson of the story could have been that she failed to save her family initially because she relied too much upon her father's strengths, but had to temper her own to truly stand a chance. But I'm seriously starting to digress now, so let's discuss her appearance. Kameo Elements of Power is a very stylized game, with a visual style that is reminiscent a bit of Disney with the huge eyes and unrealistic proportions. Kameo herself seems to be a teenage girl or a young adult, with a large chest and hips that seriously refuse to quit, even after being politely asked, bribed, and even threatened. She has lightly tanned skin with braided jet black hair and large green eyes. And as you can see, she has a few tattoos adorning her body as well. Her outfit is one part whimsical fairy and 2 parts sexualist child. Given the context of the game, I suppose her appearance makes about as much sense as anything. There doesn't seem to be any sort of theme going on throughout what the rest of her family is wearing, and in truth, it's practical enough considering she spends most of her time turning into fucking monsters. There are knights in the game which wear full suits of armor, but it's important to remember that she herself is not a knight, despite being considered a warrior of sorts. Still, the whole sexualized child thing still does not sit well with me. I know, it's stylized, but when a style goes out of the way to create a whimsical, childlike atmosphere, I would personally like to avoid putting children in outfits that scream, "Look at my underwear." Not trying to slut-shame here, it's fine if you're an adult in the real world, but in the context of a video game where she looks practically 10, with tits, it's a bit different. It is hard for me to determine whether the outfit clashes with her personality or not, though. I'm willing to say that it gets a soft pass because under the premise it is practical enough and she wasn't given the strongest personality. Which does lead us to the next discussion. How does her character fare? Kameo comes across as a woman with a strong sense of responsibility, thus confident in her own abilities and determined to set things right. She seems a bit harsh on herself at times, and falls into a doom and gloom state very briefly, but she doesn't let that deter her from trying to fix everything that's gone wrong with her world. Her decisions to infiltrate the castle in the interest of the game is seen as foolhardy by the other characters, but it doesn't seem to have any sexist undertones. She is depowered as a result of her rash actions, and while the depowering of female characters is definitely a big trope against women in much of media, it is important to remember that the depowering of main characters, after moments of near godhood in the intro stages, is an often used mechanic in games to give players a taste of the game's main gameplay, before thrusting them back to square one. Her humility based on this is demonstrated during the scene in which she saves her uncle from peril, and thankfully it seems that the scene was intended to show Kameo's increasing maturity and the responsibility she has taken for her actions, compared to some abstract guilt complex. She compares herself to her absent father, a fabled warrior that she never actually met, but upon hearing of his own faults, she realized that he was just as imperfect as she is. And with more determination than ever, she courageously reiterates that she will save her remaining family from the demons that have trapped them, and thus save the world from Thorn as well. Kameo's continued confidence in her task and her own abilities is rewarded by her family that she's rescued throughout her quest. While Kameo's initial rash decisions got her chided by most of the characters, her agency is rarely questioned, and she always defends her actions as being the best she could make at the time. Kameo's self-confidence is warranted, and by the end of the game, all those that she has helped respect her decisions and capabilities, encouraging her choice to storm the final boss's stronghold. Well, I guess the Mystic doesn't support this, but well, if you play the game, you'll see that every scene she's in, she's one step away from trying to betray Kameo and everyone else. They're not trying to be subtle with her. It's also worth noting that although they lacked any real extended scenes, the King of the Trolls seems to respect her abilities as a warrior, calling her a flame that's burned oh so brightly, but that he will extinguish. Some of the stupidest issues I have with her character are two of her idol poses. The first pose has her shifting her weight drastically in a very feminine fashion from hip to hip, while cautiously scoping out the area. I personally find the hip movement to be a bit unnecessary, kind of like they were afraid that you might forget that Kameo is a sexy woman, so watch her huge butt shift. And during the second animation, Kameo looks around confused and scratches her head. These might seem like appearance problems, but I have more of a problem with how they're used in-game than their actual existence. It's just that these idle animations play during most of the cutscenes, contradicting Kameo's personality and making her come across as completely uninterested in anything that's going on around her. But I will once again say that her actual personality that comes through her dialogue is that of a strong-willed character, even if there isn't enough dialogue to really flesh her out. However, whether it is from developer laziness or the game being caught in development hell and released without the polish it deserved, the animations during cutscenes just contradict any emotion put forth. At the very least, this is a world where men and women seem to be treated pretty equally. If Kameo is to be chided, it's for being young and rash, rather than her gender. And with that, we're just gonna finish this up with something I like to call extra bits. Basically, all the shit that wouldn't fit into the rest of these categories. As I've said before, Kameo was shifted between 3 different systems, and unfortunately this really does show in almost every facet of the game. Moments in which there was supposed to be a clearly emotional scene come across as stilted, the controls feel imprecise and mind-blowing, the ending made little sense, and there's just something kind of off about the whole thing. It's not a bad game, but it does feel like there could have been so much more. There's actually a fair amount of beta footage and images floating around the internet, and we can see plenty of differences with just a few glances. For instance, Kameo was originally designed with a darker skin tone and what seems like a possibly larger bust, though this might have to do with how fucking tiny her waist was at that stage of development. She had more of a generic fairy princess look than the almost tribal one she has now. And although I do have issues with her overall design in the game we got, I will also admit to preferring the green Forcey styled outfit that she received when compared to her white unitard one. Although plot details are scarce, she had a tiny dude dragon as a sidekick at one point. Apparently, she awoke him from being trapped in stone by kissing him on the nose, similar to how her sister released Thorn from his prison in the finished project. Having that whole power explained in more detail might have really helped the narrative of the overall story. But we'll never know. And I could go on about the gameplay differences, but they don't really have too much to do with this segment. I do think the game looked better in certain ways during the beta footage, but that's another story for a probably never time. It does seem like Rare won't be making any games like Kameo anytime soon, which is a shame. I know I had a lot of issues with the game, but I really did enjoy the world that they had started to craft. The game ends begging for a sequel, and I think it would really be nice to revisit the world with far more polish. Will we ever get one? Probably not. Still, here's hoping. The series burned bright with only one game, but who knows what they could have done with even more. Alright guys, that wraps it up for Kameo Elements of Power. Thanks for bearing with me on this first attempt. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see them get better. After all, I don't think they could really get any worse right now. Thanks again. Stay classy.
Let me give you a piece of advice. The candle that burns twice as bright only burns half as long. And you've already burned oh so bright. Ha! Prepare to die.
I haven't yet begun to burn, but when I do, all that will be left of you is ashes.